County Medical Society in both 2017 and 2018. Outside of his medical practice, Dr. Bagga teaches at the Schulich School of Medicine at Western University and has earned multiple awards which highlight his outstanding teaching abilities. Before we pass you on to Dr. Bagga, we have a couple of guidelines for everyone in attendance, just to ensure that everything runs smoothly for everyone. Please remain muted at all times to block out extra background noise.
In addition to that, if you have a question, please place it in the chat, as we will address this in the Q&A session that follows Dr. Bagga's dialogue. This session will be recorded, so if you would like, you could keep your camera on or off. If for any reason you have any technical issues, simply re-click the link and we will add you back in. Without further ado, we will now pass you on to Dr. Bagga.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sayamrit and Vijay, for a kind introduction. We will begin with, well, first of all, let me just again appreciate it. I think it's a novel idea to have an Elevate Careers Conference. I think given the circumstances of the world, you know, we're navigating uncharted waters, so I think it's a pretty cool idea to do that. So from my kidney to yours, thank you very much. So as you heard, I am a kidney doctor, so unfortunately you'll have to tolerate some kindergarten jokes regarding kidneys as we go along. This is meant to be a bit light, informal, casual, but obviously covers some philosophy of medicine, the journey itself, mentioning some of the highlights of sort of the personal journey, and hopefully some of this relates to you. And essentially it's a story. And I look forward to interacting virtually and meeting you with the Q&A section. So again, thanks you for this interesting opportunity. And regarding the weather, I gather I just heard it's snowing in Toronto. Similarly, down south here in Windsor, although where we are south, it is actually snowing as well. We've had a wonderful fall, and it was great until yesterday, and we woke up to some nice white fluffy stuff this morning. So a little bit of just a couple of slides in the background, just to cue some thoughts that we're going to go through. So we'll start sort of with the beginning, and just a second here. Oh, there we go. It's working. So sort of the story in the beginning, I'm going to get to this poem a little bit later, but in terms of a quick family background, my parents, my dad is an architect and my mom is a teacher. So why do I mention that? Because sometimes you hear about these stories that, you know, doctors' kids are the ones that get into medical school. Sometimes I think it's the opposite. People who have seen an overworked doctor in the family might be the opposite. But I think that it's a pretty even playing field in that context, just to kind of throw that out there. You know, as we evolve through this conversation, a lot of people are curious about the application process and you know, the infamous interview. And so very subtly, some of the stuff I'm talking about in the background relates to that. And so one of the common questions you get in an interview setting will be like, why? Why are you doing medicine? And everyone is you know, looking for that particular answer. So if I reflect back, I think it's worthwhile. That's starting at the beginning, is what sort of led down that path. Now, sometimes there's a serious philosophical answer, and there's a bit of a lighter side to that as well. So I do remember when I was approximately 5 or 6, back when childcare was probably not so existent, my mom was taking a first aid course. And I sort of attended the course, and I think at the end of the course, the instructor had thought that perhaps I was a little bored, so they said, well, if you're bored, why don't you write the first aid exam itself that the adults were writing, which seemed like an odd thing, but surprisingly, I actually passed that exam, which then led them to say, well, you have a career in health in front of you. So that's how very anecdotally that story started out, followed by, of course, the infamous parents, specifically my mom, buying me a Fisher-Price doctor's kit. So I would run around the house treating all forms of living beings, whether they be cats or rats or humans, with my little doctor's kit there. So that's how the story sort of started. Um, then you move ahead a few years, and in grade 3, I became envious of my friends who had freckles, and with my East Indian descent, I don't have freckles, and that was a big tragedy in my life. So I would start drawing freckles in my grade 3 class, and simultaneously became more interested in comic books rather than what the teacher was talking about, which led to some issues academically. My mom, being a teacher, sort of thought this was odd, and it, long story short, arranged a transfer of school. So I actually lived with a different family for a year, and they did some psychological testing. And during this assessment, I had to politely inform them that this elementary school was taking way too long, and we need to get to university faster. So their diagnosis after a year was boredom, and I was placed in grade 5, and apparently that resolved my boredom really fast. And so during this transfer of school, I lived with a family friend, and interestingly, these family friends turned out to be physicians, and so for a year I lived with them, and I guess I did become enamored by their stories, because people come home and I guess they talk about what they do at work. And so one of the father was a surgeon and the mother was a cardiologist, and they would come home and they'd pull up these papers and there'd be strips of things, so there'd be these EKGs or cardiograms, and she'd be looking at me like describing letters like PQRST, and I just thought this was phenomenal that she could see this through these electrical tracings. And the father was a surgeon who'd come home and he had stolen someone's appendix or taken out someone's gallbladder, and every day he seemed so excited by this, and it was sort of baffling and puzzling, but exciting at the same time, that someone could be so excited about removing someone else's appendix. Nonetheless, I think all of these have influential points along the trajectory. So I guess, a few years passes, and sort of digging through the archives, my mom sort of located this poem that I actually wrote when I was 12, and it's listed there. And I have a special needs brother whose name is Jitin. And I think you underestimate the things you learn in life. And so having a developmentally delayed brother or special needs child, you can learn a lot about life philosophy in these situations, which I think does affect people in different ways. And I think I genuinely thought that I would make a major medical difference in his health issues, as he wasn't able to walk or talk for a variety of reasons. And so it was an important thing that I think evolved or morphed into some of the psychology behind that. And I think this might relate to many people. When you're going through your school, you have some role models or guides or mentors. And I found that some of the math and science teachers I could relate to, and I just found some really good mentors in that, and they were very motivating and inspiring. And I feel that as I look back and I talk to people who've gone through the medical path, that's a very common thread, that there was some inspiration behind some teachers. I think teachers are, very valuable in what they contribute to all of us, and we owe a lot of our lives to the people in the teaching profession. I think is amazing. Now, my dad actually had at some point a different vision for what I would do. Him being an architect, he thought, well, if I become an engineer or architect, we could have a business together. So I actually really tried. I took some courses in architectural and design and that sort of thing. And I found that back in that day, sort of before computer-aided design, I found that for every 2 lines I would draw, I was erasing 8 of them. And I just had to break the tragic news to him that was not going to, was not going very well. And with my mom's background, she was a teacher, and she also, in terms of her background, she had reached an Olympic level of athletics. So I assumed that my genetics were in my favor, and that I was going to go down more of an athletic path. But someone has to talk to you, kidney to kidney, and say to you that, as my mom did, she told me, you will never be a professional athlete. And so that honesty was appreciated. I have to appreciate my mom for that. And she said, I would use your strengths otherwise. But a lot of that is to say that we appreciate our supportive families in the journey of life that we have. And that is a bit of the beginning, in terms of education, career, and beyond. So, getting a little more specific, what is the goal? So I know from talking to the organizers that many of you here are either in university or certainly close to university, probably with a bit of a science intention or science background, with an inclination towards being in a health field, with a significant of you emphasizing a career in medicine, which, I'm replaying my thought processes through that, and that's why I was discussing the history of that. But it's good to pause and reflect and say, what is the goal? Like generally from your heart or your kidney, what is the goal? And sometimes you can kind of think you're on the right path, but you have to pause and say, is your goal a job? Is there a specific career where you do want to help people in the health background? But it gets more detailed. Is the job you're interested in, does it need to be in the city that you're in, or can it be anywhere? Do you need to be close to your family in the long term or not? Are there other motivations for your goals in career? Are there expectations from family or society or otherwise? Are there financial reasons for choosing a particular career? Is it just the allure or the attraction of getting the med school interview? And sometimes we don't know the full answer to some of these questions, but it is worthy of pause and thought on that. And if medicine is the goal, there isn't really, truthfully, as you're going to already know, I should say, one magical formula. But there are some themes that are inherent within this. And I think that it goes without saying that one has to be prepared for an element of sacrifice when one goes down this career, as with other professional careers. And I will preface everything by saying this is not to say this is the way in medicine or health fields and not others, but I think there are some nuances within this path that are a bit unique because it's very personal. It's you as a person helping someone's health of a person as opposed to something else that's a bit distant from one's health. And when people say health is wealth, I mean, they really are being honest about that. And then, when does this so-called sacrifice begin? I mean, if you look at the trajectory, right, in elementary school, you're already putting in some effort to do well later. And when is later? Well, like it would be high school. And then in high school, you're preparing yourself for the university path and building a portfolio of sorts of who you are as a person. And then preparing yourself within these efforts to be ready for the rigors of medical school and then residency and then career beyond that. And unless you have some divine energy that has placed all knowledge in your brain to do well and excel, it does take effort. It takes some sacrifice. It takes some determination to proceed down this journey, which doesn't really end, to be honest, but it's worth it. And I guess I would say philosophically, although it takes drive and it takes effort, I'm not sure. And the reason I put the quotation marks on the quote of sacrifice is I'm not sure it truly is sacrifice in the true definition, because really, if you enjoy it for the most part, it doesn't feel like sacrifice. It's something you actually grow to enjoy during the path itself. Even if there's some bumps on the road and some of the steps are not exactly the most exhilarating, it is worth it. I mean, you do have to enjoy the path and ultimately the career. I mean, there are some fairly long hours that get involved with it, but it implies the drive does have to come within. It can't really be an external reason for the famous "my parents said so" or societal expectations or financial dreams or my friend is doing it, so will I. It does have to be a pretty strong, intense internal drive. And I must admit, I'm not sure that I loved every aspect of the science degree I initially did. Like when it starts out more general, right? General chemistry, physics, biology, it's all interesting, it's exciting. And when you get into specifics, I personally found some elements of, when you get into second year and third year and you start plowing through that, some elements, it's hard. Like I had really trouble resonating with botany. Like I did not really want to learn about xylem and phloem. That was not my goal, and I struggled with that. And there were moments when I said to myself, "Do I really want a field in medicine if this is what it's from?" And I had to see past that and say, I want to deal with the human body. This is a stepping stone to get there, and tolerate. There are bits and pieces of it, and that's part of the package, I guess. And the degree of determination, sometimes they say, you shouldn't put all your eggs in one basket. You certainly have to put a lot of them. You have to be pretty intensely involved when you're trying to commit to the path of the educational path and subsequently the career path. And I remember in one of my, reflecting back on one of my earlier interviews where they asked, the question was interesting. What would you do if you didn't get into medical school? And so I was I thought it was an easy question. I said, it's no problem. I'll just apply again. And they said, okay, what happens if you don't get in after 2 years? And then I said, well, simple. And then they said, okay, 4 years goes by. You've done a master's and they kept pushing the question. And I suppose I'll call it my innocence, but probably maybe a bit of immaturity. I just kept saying, well, I'll just keep applying. I'm not sure that was truthfully the right answer, and it's probably maybe not what they were looking for, but just to give you a sense of the intensity or intention that I had, that I said, I will do this, and there is nothing else I will do. But I mean, probably when I reflect back on that moment, it is a wiser plan to say that it is good to have a plan B. And there are lots of health fields that are equally rewarding that one might need to consider or reconsider. If plan A doesn't work, there may be other equally good plans, whether it's pharmacy or occupational therapy or physiotherapy or physician assistant and audiology. There's so many health fields out there that one can contribute in different ways, and potentially non-health fields, but there are certainly lots of ways to be productive and successful in life. But just to give you an insight as to how that portrayed for myself. So when we're talking about life, when we're talking about a career in medicine, when we're talking about the application to medicine, this infamous word is going to chase you, and that word is balance, right? It's a word we are all perhaps striving for in life without realizing it. It never ends. And in summary, it sort of is too much of a good thing is not a good thing. It may be even a bad thing. So studying too much is not good. Working too much in a career of medicine is not good. So balance doesn't start later. It sort of starts now, in this moment. One can't say, I'm going to do all of one thing right now just for the intensity of getting to medicine, put everything else on the back burner. That's not healthy. That's not a good way to do this. There's not one recipe for this topic of balance that, this in this never-ending search. It's individual to the individual, to you. So there are many layers or flavors to this. There is the academic layer, right? And I think that's a redundant conversation for this group here. Everyone's very academically inclined already and saying, I'm in pursuit of a professional career in health, possibly medicine. I won't spend too much time on that. I think that everyone's working pretty hard on that group. So when balance comes in, the various aspects of life we're talking about balance is something that's not just now, but long-term. So service, that may be an element of, say, volunteering. People sort of come up with questions, well, what should I volunteer in? It's what you're interested in volunteering, which is the best thing to do because it'll feel good that you're doing it for yourself and for the community. As opposed to the famous do it for an application or do it because someone said so. It doesn't have to be setting up orphanages in countries on the other side of the world because people get caught up on the scale of it. I think it's important to do what relates to yourself as an individual, to what your community needs may be. And other parts may be part-time work, and there may be various reasons to get involved with a part-time career. And but certainly, even if it's as simple as keeping oneself busy to be balanced and learning the concept of balance is, even one simplistic reasons amongst the other obvious reasons. There's the artistic side of life. So for some, it's music. It could be singing. It could be instrumental. Painting could be movies. There's some element of more the personal side of that may be helpful. We don't talk about this, but the mental health side is increasingly being talked about, and I think that's a good transition. It's very individual again, as you are an individual. It could be as basic as, keep maintaining a prayer within one's own faith. And I don't think that can be underestimated. And sometimes we don't talk about that, but whatever faith one individually is, and take it to its fullest. I think there's a lot of peacefulness that can come for that. It could be just a general sense of being mindful. It could be hobbies. It could be reflection. It could be whatever gives you peace of mind or mental health is a useful thing to keep the stress levels down. Physical health is something we sometimes neglect. We don't pay attention to it, particularly in the phase that you're in right now, where you're sometimes so driven about, I've got a goal and I'm going to not necessarily look left or right. But it's always good to try to incorporate it. And I think back to something my dad told me when I was young, and that was just do it for 10 minutes a day. And as simple as that sounds, once you do that 10 minutes of exercise, the 11th is really easy. The first minute is the hard one. And if you sort of say, well, I got to go to the gym and it's 20 minutes away and I got to spend an hour and I got to dress up and do this, it just grows out of proportion and gets more and more complicated. I think what's good is to say, what exercise is best is anything, whatever you do, whatever you enjoy, whatever your favorite thing is, do that. Start with 10 minutes and certainly go from there. I think that's useful, and it could be an outside jog, it could be anything. And often it changes. I find one year I focus more on, doing P90X, and the next year it's more on yoga, and the following year it's the gym, and then now it's like with COVID-19, it's very, let's see what I can do in the garage. But it's important what now and then for the future. And ideally, do you want to do things that you can perhaps maintain for the future? So I love playing soccer. I have since childhood, and it's a little harder now, right? But you can do that intermittently based on availability of people. Something as simple as table tennis. You play it as vigorously as some of us do, it can be a good exercise, and you can maintain that through all seasons. Along the same theme is the topic of nutrition, and we underestimate that. Healthy, nutritious foods. That we spend our whole careers in medicine telling people how to be healthy. Keep active, but take some rest, eat healthy, keep hydrated with water. But do we do it for ourselves? And we should all start now and say, what are we doing for our own health if we're trying to convey others to be healthy as well? So certainly lots of fresh fruits and vegetables out there, and trying to minimize the snacks and the fast foods and the obvious things. But certainly important for a healthy mind to have a healthy body as well. So the theme of balance, it covers a lot of ground on that domain. Within medicine itself, when you talk about a career, there's almost like there's multiple careers built in to this particular career. So I would say that partly it's kind of cool because you're not picking one career. You're saying, so partly you're a detective, right? You're collecting data from different sources, labs, blood tests, urine tests, x-rays, ultrasounds, pharmacies, other doctors, and then family members, mainly because patients lie to you and don't tell you the truth. So you got to get information for everywhere. Not all patients, just joking. But you're really are kind of a detective. So it's kind of cool. You have a lot of strategy involved with this. If you like Inspector Gadget from a kid, or whatever detective you liked, you can be that comic book hero in your mind anyways. You have to be a bit of a mind reader and a psychic. So there's that element to that. Someone says, I have pain, and what's your pain at? 9 out of 10. You have to sort of sit there and go, really, is it 9 out of 10 or not? Or someone says it's 1 out of 10, but really they're being stubborn and they don't want to tell you how much pain they're in, because then you'll have to have them stay in hospital. So you have to do that as well. You have to have a lie detector built in your brain. Famous thing, I asked them, do you take your medications? They all say yes. And then I had to say, no, you're a liar. I know you're not, because the pharmacy hasn't filled it in a year. So we have all these sort of aspects within the career. Obviously, as a science background, we are, you're chemists. You're mixing different potions and medications in an attempt to preserve and maintain health and prevent certainly significant medical health issues. Not every field does this, but I specifically am a professional backstabber. And what I mean by that is I actually do stab people in the back. So I take a long needle and I put it through the back into their kidney, and I take pieces out. So a kidney biopsy or samples of kidney. And after I'm a professional backstabber, they thank me for it. So it has its coolness factor to that as well. And depending on the field you end up in, it has its layers, right? If you like plumbing, you can do things like urology, where if you're a carpenter, you might do orthopedics. So depending on, then you can add extra overlays to this career. So this career within careers is kind of interesting. So that was more on a philosophical note. Now, more specifically, now this is a very comical, complex slide of once you get into medicine, you sort of think it's done, right? I got into medical school, I'm all done. Well, then the game just begins. That's just kindergarten. Now you have to decide what field of medicine, and this is just a fun way of saying these are the various fields that you could get entangled with. There's the clinical side of medicine, and there's the non-clinical side of medicine. So the clinical side means more the patient care side. So that could be obstetrical, it could be psychiatric, it could be pathology, it could be radiology, dermatology. So there's a lot of various paths that one could take. There's in many fields, there's a medicine side and a surgical side. So to use mine as an example, in the kidney field, there's nephrology, which is the medication or medical side of things, and then there's the surgical side, which is urology. So the urologist would do the surgeries and procedures, like removing kidneys or bladder surgery or taking out the stone. And on the medication side for nephrology, where our goal is to prevent kidney failure, and so people with diabetes and blood pressure, you want to prevent them failing. And if they fail, they go on dialysis. So we do that type of procedure. So the dialysis procedure. And then we do small things like taking samples of kidneys, like I said, or professional backstabbers, or if it's an emergency at 2 a.m, we put in these tubes, what we call central lines, into the jugular vein and thread it into the heart. And that way we can access the blood to purify it, to remove the toxins. That's a very specific to my career, but every career has its little niche or nuance, and one has to, once one gets into medicine, to kind of figure out what does make sense at that point. So, for example, if you're, jokingly aside on this, it says if you like a little bit of everything, and that's sort of family medicine. They do everything. They're the most important, probably, doctor out there, because that's your first line of defense. That's your first person that sees you for your healthcare, and they do need to know a little bit about everything, which is a challenging career, actually. And because there's variety, people like that field for its piece that it brings. Then there's the combination side of things. You can say, I want to do family medicine and do what we call it's called +1. So you do an extra year, and you can say, I want to do a year of surgical assisting, or hospital-based medicine, or palliative care, or anesthesia, or obstetrics. You can do a little bit more of something and have a little extra focus in it. So then you can sort of do a little bit of hybrid medicine. And everyone has their interests. Someone has like sports medicine, and you kind of tend to bring your personality into that, and this chart may or may not help you. We can talk more about that later, because that's a bit early to get into that, but I did want to lightly touch on that. Non-clinical stuff, again, along the spectrum of varieties, you could get into global medicine, you could get into research, which I've gotten involved with, and it's like I do it lightly. I'm not in a big center like Toronto or London, and they do lots of research, but I like to do a little bit. Or the teaching aspect. So in Windsor, we have a satellite medical school from London, and you can do lots of teaching, which there's something enjoyable about that. You can get into administrative side of medicine, which is interesting. Some people want to do sort of global outreach stuff, so Doctors Without Borders, or the MSF, that sort of category, and that has its own interest level to it. Probably a little bit of danger to that too, but that appeals to certain people as well. So in summary, doing medical school is like kindergarten, and then you have to, it's a small step in this big picture of where we go through to next. So people have a lot of questions about the interview process as well, and I would simplify this to meeting a stranger on a mode of transportation. Now, I used to say a train or a plane or a bus, but with COVID-19, it seems like we're doing a lot less of that. But theoretically, if you were sitting on a train and you sat beside someone and then you just have a conversation. That is in my opinion, the summary of how you want your interview to go. And what does that mean? It means it's casual. It means it's genuine. It's the person there is thinking, why do you want medical school? This is why. Where do you want to go? And why? What makes you think you want to do school? And how did you get to that thought process? And what are you doing to get there? Very much a casual, informal, honest conversation. Now, why I say that specifically is people get caught up in this, what is the right answer? You see a lot of preparation for what is the right answer. The right answer is really what comes from within you, what's in your heart or kidney. It sounds corny, but that is the truth. And over preparing for the right answer, I think confuses people, messes them up, and often sounds memorized. And that's probably not a good theme. Different schools have different approaches, as you know, but the themes in all of them are you able to communicate? And I think that's a big theme. So if you're that 99.9% person but can't look someone in the eye and have a conversation, you're in trouble. Dealing with stress is something that gets gleaned out of an interview. How do they do that? Well, the interview itself is stressful, so you're under stress, and they're just seeing how you deal with that. That's a big thing. Why? Because medicine has this level of stress, and it's how you deal with it. And then the sense of conveying a balanced individual. So you're kind of giving your own PR about how you are a balanced individual. Not lying about it, being truthful about this is who I am, as we alluded to earlier. I have my academic sort of sphere, I have my social sphere, my maybe my spiritual sphere, my athletic side, my musical side, service oriented side, and the things that we all enjoy doing pretty well naturally as part of our life. And you kind of convey that. And again, I'll repeat again, there is no right one answer, no right one story. The truth is whatever your story is. That's why I began with the lighthearted, informal story. When, you're sitting there listening to me saying, well, I, got a doctor's kit when I was a kid, and I attended a first aid class when I was 5 with my mom. And that's what started up. That's the truth. I didn't have this eureka moment where, it was just an evolution of a few small steps that happened. I didn't have this, illness with a near-death experience and survived, and that's why I wanted to join it. Everyone's story is different, and that's okay. I would just stick with what the truth is. I'll give you a quick example from an interview that I had. So I was being interviewed, and the question I got was, and I will preface it by saying it wasn't exactly a med school interview. It was I was in medicine applying for internal medicine, so slightly different, but it conveys the point. It was an interview where they asked me, what journal do you read? And, I sat there thinking about it, going like, what journal do I read? Like, what medical journal do I read? It was the question. And I thought to myself, like, I'm in medical school. I don't read medical journals. And I sort of was honest. I just said, I don't read medical journals. I'm just trying to I can barely read the textbook and get through that. I got to learn my core foundations, and then I'll read journals. And so the interviewer, you could see they were holding a little check box, like a pen over a checkbox, and wanted to put check in. And she was kind enough to ask it again. I'm just going to ask you again. Like, think a little deeper. Any journal is fine. Just name a journal. And she was really trying to be helpful, and I could see that. But then I was partly stuck because I didn't remember the name of a medical journal. Secondly, I knew I didn't read medical journals. So I said, I'm just going to be just honest. I don't read medical journals. I read my books, and I can barely finish that. And I moved on. And she said, okay. She called a timeout in the middle of the interview. And she said, listen, I'm pausing the interview as a friend to tell you, I'm trying to help you here. Just pick a journal, say you read it, I'll put a check mark, and it'll help you. It'll move you on, and we'll get to the next level. And so she did the same, and it went around through a couple cycles. And unfortunately, I not being stubborn, I just said, I genuinely don't read journals, and I'm going to stick with that. And so she went time in and out 2 or 3 times, and she kind of got upset almost, but had to. I stuck my ground, and she had to play along. And so I just stayed with that. Now, the reason I tell that whole story is I still got into that institution, and despite them sort of not getting the checkbox, I think at some level people look back and say, a person held their ground. There's a principle, and they stuck to the truth of it. So I think that's an important thing to do, and that's very useful and important. Sorry, minor deviation here. Life is full of challenges. So, speaking of challenges, we'll talk about challenges. Um, Many careers have challenges, right? It's not, we're talking about health or medicine, but if you were in the army, you'd have a different set of challenges. If you have a job that you're up all night long and weekends and shift work, it has its challenges. Every career has their challenges. And one of the topics that's worthwhile mentioning is, as much as I love my job, and as rosy as it may seem to those on the outside, it's never, nothing is perfect, and there is no perfect career, right? That's, you have to accept that. So being on call, right? The term on call or on duty for the hospital has its challenges, right? You have a phase where you're in your office practice, and you have a phase where you're in the on duty for the hospital, and in that phase, 24/7, you're at their beck and call for a phone call, and that's fine. If someone's unwell, you want to be available for them. But for those extended periods of time, that also means you're sharing your responsibility being on call to the hospital, but you have your responsibilities as life goes on to a spouse, to kids, to parents, family members, and even friends that become like your family. And so you kind of end up saying things, well, I can't come out tonight, or I'll come out, but I have to be within 20 minutes of the hospital, and this sort of thing. So um, it's something to be aware of entering the field, and you kind of have to learn you can't bring your personal life to work, and vice versa. You can't really bring your work home, and then that's a challenge. It takes a little bit of time to sort of figure that out. But it evolves. Another thing is, bad things happen, bad outcomes happen. And mentally being prepared for this. You're dealing with health. That means bad things are going to happen. You're going to have some outcomes that don't go well. It may be the health gets worse. It may be someone doesn't survive, and you have to be prepared for those conversations. The good news is they train you really well for that, and you will adjust to those complicated conversations as you evolve gradually to that. Documentation is a piece that no one ever loved, right? I did not go into medicine because I love documenting. So I love taking care of patients and analyzing, and being that detective and finding a possible treatment and then seeing what happens. All of that's exciting. The documenting of it is naturally, some of it is a bit repetitive, some of it's a little boring. It's not fun. A necessary evil part of the job, but ongoing education is perhaps a part of many careers, but it's really vital in a career of medicine. You do not want to be that person that graduates and then for the next 20 years decides not to read a journal. Now I read journals. Now you have to keep current, and that's important. It's usually, that's usually enjoyable and exciting, but some people don't love doing that part, but it doesn't bother me so much. So as we come towards the end of our piece, on my side anyways, I honestly love my career, and I think a lot of us in medicine do. As we've covered, there's lots of variety, there's an intensity to it, there's a very rewarding part to it. I would highly recommend it for those who do have that intensity, that passion, that desire, the determination, the ability, the inclination. I would highly recommend it. I would definitely go through this process again. So the process most of you are in already, which is grueling hours and hours of work and labs and assignments, and wondering when this will ever end. It is worth it. As I mentioned, there are the elements of the political or bureaucratic sides of medicine that can get a little complicated, but no career is perfect, and it's still very worth it. I would highly encourage you, those who are on the path to work hard towards this goal. Don't let the goal consume you. That's where balance comes in, but certainly keep working towards it. I think that's I think if if you do get in, and I hope you all do, if you are in medicine, the career, don't let it consume you. In the beginning, it has that potential because you work so hard to get there. It can consume you, and you don't want to pretend to be balanced. You actually want to strive to be balanced. The focus is patient care, right? That's we can't highlight or emphasize that enough. It's about just being a caring person. If you had to pick one thing you want in your doctor, it would be that caring person. You're not worried if they're Einstein or they're the world-class researcher or the best teacher in the world. You just want them to care about your health, and that's what they want from you. So that word caring, or being, if you don't care, at least pretend to care, but really try to genuinely care. It really makes a big difference. It overshadows everything else. it's so rewarding. It's also fun to get involved with other aspects, whether the administrative, the teaching, the research, and teaching can be involved with students such as yourselves and colleagues as well. So lots and lots of layers and flavors to the career. So as you can tell, it's exciting and enjoyable. So I will pause here and again thank you all for joining in from the various parts of Ontario, mostly Toronto, I believe, and I can see some Windsor people here. So thank you again to the organizers of Elevate Career Conference. If you'd like to stay on, I believe we're going to have a little question and answer session that Sai, Amrit, and Vijay are going to help facilitate. I will pause and turn it back to them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bagga, for this excellent presentation. So as mentioned, we are open to questions now, and we have some in the chat box actually. But if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to either put it in the chat box or you can use the raise hand function and we'll get to you, as time progresses.
Great. So we'll just
start off with
some of the questions we've received. The first question for Dr. Bagga is a question that is asking how you balanced your academic and extracurriculars. So did you put more emphasis on one over the other, especially given that nowadays extracurriculars are really emphasized in the application process?
So that's a good question, and that's why, as you notice, I spent a lot of time on balance because it is a challenge for all of us, and myself included. I think we're always navigating towards that goal. And I won't stand up on a soapbox and say I achieved balance. I am attempting to achieve it, and I state that humbly. I think putting all of your emphasis on one thing is where one gets in trouble. So specific to your question, should I put most of my emphasis on academics and just lightly sprinkle some other stuff on there to give the illusion I'm balanced, is where one gets into trouble. So, I guess, simplistically, when you're looking at this, sometimes you have a situation where you're really strong in one course and then you're weak in another. And to give it a very blunt example, like let's say you have 3 courses of 100 and you have 2 courses where you have 80. That's not a wise way to play the game, quote unquote, right? You know that you're judged by a GPA system where you're converted down to a 4.0, up to a 4.0 system. So anything above approximately 90 in most schools is a 4.0. And once you start going into 85 to 89, it's approximately 3.9, and if it's 80 to 84, you're 3.7. So you want to see if you happen to be in this hypothetical situation where you maximize the higher numbers as much as you can and lower it from a GPA point of view. So in a situation like that, you'd say to someone, well, try to get 91 in everything rather than 103 and 80 in another. So that's a portion of the answer. But more to get more specific is the balance of academics and we'll call it non-academics, the extracurriculars. It really, I think, does come down to putting some priorities on time management, and everyone has to sort of see what works for them and try to basically, optimize whatever you're doing in the least amount of time. And so every aspect of life ends up becoming time management. It means if you wake up in the morning and you're taking an hour to get ready, you got to tell yourself that's too long, right? That's where time management kicks in, where you got to sit there and say, time everything you do in your morning routine and you compress it. That's not adding value to your life. And that sounds silly, but you'd be amazed at where time gets swallowed. And you do have to do a little bit of introspection and self-analysis and say, where's my time lost? In general themes, sometimes labs are worth 10% and an exam is worth 40%. But you got to look at your time. If you're spending 9-10 hours on a lab that's worth 0.5% of your mark, you got to sort of play the game a little and strategize a bit and say, well, I got to devote most of my time to where I get the most benefit in terms of marks. And then similarly, when you're getting into extracurriculars, do stuff you enjoy. And again, don't let it consume you. You have to say, I want to, if you're going to do a voluntary activity, or you're going to do a research project, or you're going to do a part-time job, let it be part-time. Your focus still is the academics, right? You kind of alluded in your question, the academics are the biggest piece of them all still. The extracurriculars alone, if you say I'm really balanced, but I have a 65% average, as you know, without being blunt, that's not going to work. So you certainly got to have a robust academic average and then complement it with a reasonable amount of extracurriculars. Sometimes you don't realize stuff that can be extracurricular. If you say, well, I just go for a walk a day with a few friends. Well, at the end of the day, that is time that you're doing. It's fitness related. You could say it's the South Windsor Walking Club that I founded. It's slight stretch, but it's still the truth. I mean, give it some formality. The things that you do, make it work for you. Do the things you enjoy and make it work for you is what I'm trying to say. Is don't find out, well, what are the things they want on the applications and do that. Do the things you enjoy, and keep it lively and energetic, so that because you'll feel good when you sleep at night when you do it that way, short term and long term. And then I think those are some of the ways of making that balance get there. And one last thing is we underestimate sleep, and especially in the student phase. So one quick thing to mention there is if you start sleeping later and later and later, the quality of sleep you're getting is ineffective. And no one really believes this, and I didn't either, until it was slammed into my face. But you cannot sleep every night at 2 a.m. and then be productive for the next day. An analogy someone gave me: humans are the only people that decide when the sun sets to keep staying up later and later and later when all the other animals sleep. Now, I don't know if that's scientifically accurate, but the point is there is a time to sleep, and it's good to get your sleep at the right time and the right amount. And then you get a better quality sleep, which allows you to be much more efficient with the use of your time in your daytime. So I'll add that as a last piece before we go on to the next one.
What a great answer. So we actually have a participant who wants to directly ask you a question. He's used the raise hand function. So Adi, you could go for it and ask your question.
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Amit Bagga, for that amazing presentation. Honestly, I had a lot of questions and concerns that I wrote down, asked, answered. So all those questions are gone. So I have 3 questions, and one of them is straightforward. 2 of them is specific to my interest within the medical field. So I'll ask the more general one first before I ask the other 2. So my first question is, during the interview, the interviewers, do they focus more on your general academic achievement or what you've done to pursue your academic goals? Or are they more so getting a better understanding of your specific interest within the medical field? Why you're joining into medicine, or what specific niche within the medical field that you're navigating or drawing yourself towards? Or is it more just general, what have you achieved and what can you bring to the table?
Okay, that's a good question. So I think simplistically, the focus of the interview is not, it's a general question because there's a lot of schools and a lot of styles of interviewing, but the general answer is they're not to get into that interview room, you've already proven you're academically sound and robust. There's not much more you can say than the person to the left and right of you can also say. If you're in that interview room, you're all academically solid. So they're no longer interested in your academics at that point. At this point, they want to know what you are as a person. And that's what, reflecting back to what we were talking about, balance. If I were asked, tell me about yourself, I would not say anything about academics or medicine. I would say, I'm interested in table tennis, I'm interested in soccer, I enjoy, certain cuisines. The things I enjoy to do, I play double R harmonium, I play certain instruments, I like singing. I would talk about the non-scientific, non-lab, non-medical person that you are when you get into that domain. We know that you're academically strong at that point.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And so now my next 2 questions, more specific to my passion or the passion I've kind of developed in the medical field. So I'm very much intrigued with surgery. specifically with neuroscience and neurosurgery. I guess I'm obsessed with it. I'm really crazy about the brain and pursuing a kind of career and profession with surgery, like neurosurgery. So, what are some suggestions you have to kind of solidify this interest in pursuing a career within surgery? Because, frankly speaking, every time I tell someone I'm really passionate about really passionate about neurosurgery, it feels like people are just talking me down and saying it takes a lot of time to become a neurosurgeon. It's very strenuous. It's a really long journey. What are some suggestions you have to solidify this interest? And then the follow up to that question is, do you have any insights within the neurosurgical field as to there being a difference between being a pure quote unquote brain guy or a quote unquote spinal cord guy, or like a master of both the brain and the spinal cord? Because I've heard like you must have really good hands to work on the spinal cord, or just be really calm, not just physically, but also mentally as a neurosurgeon.
Okay, so good question. I'll answer the theme of that question. And if there's more specifics that you have, we can talk offline about that. But to answer your question, I would honestly, if I were you, I would say to you, put a pause on neurosurgery, not because it's difficult, not because it's surgery, not because it's complicated or you need steady hands, but it is wiser to be open-minded to the variety and diversity of professions that exist. When you go through your medical training, you will get a couple of weeks in everything. You will do a few weeks in psychiatry and obstetrics and all the spectrums of surgery, all the spectrums of medicine, and you'll be shocked at what's out there, because there's so many fields I can name that you will not know. And you really would be wise to say, I love neurosurgery, keep it in your heart, that's fine. But just put it on a temporary pause and let your mind be open to all the fields that are out there. I had a friend who told me the exact same story you just did. On the day one, I sat beside him in the class in my first day of medical school. Exactly what you just said, every word. And he did 4 years of medical school. He got into neurosurgery, did 5 years of neurosurgery, and he was amazing. He practiced for 1 week and quit. Now, the reason you need to know that is, don't pigeonhole yourself so early. You're young. You have a whole bunch of careers. Now, if you end up being the best neurosurgeon in the world, all the power to you. I'm not discouraging you that you said someone was discouraging you. I'm just saying you're too early to be picking your medical career. You just got to get through kindergarten first, get through medical school. Around your second or third year of medical school, then sit down and ask these questions again and say, am I still interested in neurosurgery? You should not be focusing that much this early, is my humble opinion. And what I would say is, if there's more follow-up to this, why don't we take that offline? Because I see there's a lot of other questions. Hopefully that was reasonable.
No, that's actually like something that I needed to hear, just keeping an open mind and seeing where I can go from there. So I appreciate you answering those questions, and I'll definitely reach out for any specifics that we can talk offline. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Perfect. Those were some great questions and some great answers to follow. So another question we have here is, what were some of the obstacles or adversities that you had to overcome, on your journey in terms of medical school, and how did you overcome these?
So sometimes the obstacles are related to the timeline. So, for example, when I was applying, right now with social media and internet being prevalent, you pretty well can know everything you need to know on the click of a button. And at that time, getting information was a challenge. As I alluded to, I didn't have any family members in medicine, and a few, but not too many people in the career. So I didn't really, necessarily feel like I had the access to resources or guidance. So I think, kudos to your crew for making a program like this. So a program like this would have been really well welcomed or received, to just have the ability to kind of talk candidly and hear about things. I think that was one of the bigger things. It was just, very similar things, right? The unknown. Listening to the questions is like, it was the famous, what do the medical schools want? What do they want to hear? And and I wish someone sat down with me and just said, there is no right answer. Stop looking for the right answer. Just answer the question. And the question is, you answer is the way you sat beside an unknown stranger on a train. That was probably the best guidance I got later. And the best advice I can give to all of you is don't get consumed by the right answer and the right path and the only way. It's a very, very open-minded interview process where they're just trying to get to know you. Using another example, likes like. That's a phrase or a saying, right? Likes like. If I'm interviewing you, or you're interviewing me, if you resonate with something that was said, then you sort of all of a sudden you like that. And so if I said to someone I play table tennis and that person says, oh, you know what, I do too. What kind of table do you have and what type of spin do you use? All of a sudden you have a little bit of a bond there. Now you don't necessarily do it intentionally, but that's where the informal, casual side of you carries a lot of weight. Because everyone I can tell on this thread is probably very academically inclined and towards this goal and towards this cause. So it very much, in terms of an obstacle, was just not knowing that it was simpler than I thought. And it was made more complicated because of all these unknowns.
Thank you, Dr. Bagga, for that great answer. We've actually got a question from someone. Archit, you can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question. And everyone else, your questions will be addressed as well.
Thanks, Vijay, for organizing such a great conference over here. And Dr. Bagga, I just want to thank you so much for such a lovely presentation. It was honestly a pleasure hearing about your life and how you came to realize that medicine was the field for you. Just building on that, I think I would love to know how you chose nephrology and just where your love for the kidney stems from.
That's a good question. It's interesting. So the word, when you get into medicine, you're kind of starting to have to choose a path. Right? Do you have an obstetrical gynecology brain? Do you have a pediatric brain? Do you have a surgical brain? And we can come to what that means. So surgical, obviously people want to work with their hands. And I kind of got a bit of, I liked everything, which made me a bit confused. So the confusion continued for a while. So then I thought to myself, the field of internal medicine was a specialization of a little bit of all the organs. And I just bought myself time to see, well, where would I really ultimately want to end up? And as I evolved through internal medicine, now that bought me 3 years extra of doing 2 months, I should say, in the heart, 2 months in the lung, 2 months in the kidney, 2 months on and on and on, ICU. And then as I evolved through that, a few pieces caught my attention. One was I had a really good mentor. There was a particularly good nephrologist, and the nephrologists that we worked with were just kind of fun, social people. And, it was as simple as they were fun and they looked happy. And as humans, we say, well, I want contentment and happiness too. If they're happy, if I do that, I'll be happy. And it was very basic at some level. There was another layer of, I really enjoyed the physiology of it at the undergraduate level and kind of trying to understand the functions of it. Now, someone else might say I had more fun with the liver physiology or the endocrine physiology, but it resonated with me. I partly wanted to do some volunteer work overseas, and I wanted to pick a field that allowed me to do that. So there's a hospital that I found near Bangalore in South India where I can do some volunteer work, not quite annually, but as often as I can go, and it feels good to me. So I had picked a field that I would be allowed to do volunteer work, but I didn't want to end up in a field that was too academic or too procedural that it wouldn't allow me to do that. So for me, it had that piece to it. To me, there was variety. There was a little bit of mild kidney disease. There was the home dialysis. There's hospital dialysis. There was transplantation. There was rare diseases like lupus. When they're on dialysis, as tragic as that is for the patient, you see them every week on dialysis. So you have that familiarity and that consistency from week to week. So you're kind of like a family medicine role in the dialysis unit. So you have that general part that you get to practice and a specialized part. And there were a few procedures that I mentioned earlier as well, the biopsies and the lines. So for me, it worked. So, and everyone, I would walk into the cardiac unit and it would say CCU. And for some reason in my brain, I would look CCU, the cookbook care unit. They all have a heart attack. They all get the same meds. they get an echocardiogram and an angiogram, and I was like, it's a cookbook. It's the same thing. And now you talk to a cardiologist and they say it's fascinating and whether. So sometimes everyone's brain just clicks onto something else. So, but thank you for that interesting question.
Thank you, Dr. Bagga. Just another question we received from one of our listeners. They're interested in ophthalmology, but they would like to know how to pursue volunteering options or work experience in clinics or other companies. And I guess that extends to basically any specialty or any field within medicine, because obviously that's an important aspect.
Yeah, so part of the answer would be, again, to say is ophthalmology is a fascinating field, and again, I would certainly encourage you to pursue that. I would temporarily say the same thing I said to Adi, and that is pause for a bit and expose yourself. You're a kid in a candy store. Every candy's sweet right now. So, but taste all of them before you decide the one for you. I would start with that. And then the second part is, assuming you're in medical school, like right now, it would be too difficult to do that. There, especially with COVID-19, to get access into any clinic right now is essentially impossible for the moment, because everyone's worried more about safety than us, and you're all on the same boat on that. So every one of you, I have lots of people ask me, can I come to your clinic? Can I come to the hospital? That's the rules. Right now, for safety reasons, temporarily, that's all on hold. And that's on hold for everyone on the planet. So there's this fear that I'm not getting that opportunity. But again, it's all pretty equalized. When the dust settles, if you're interested in a specific field, yeah, I do encourage you to spend time with them, spend the time with a variety of different people in that field to get a taste of the different aspects of it. Some of it might be in an operating room, some might be in a clinic. Try to go to a different city, like if you're studying in one city, but you're from another city, try to get a exposure, because you are making a 30, 40-year commitment to that career. So I would definitely encourage you to make sure you taste it fully, and hopefully that solidifies it. I know people that thought they were interested in plastic surgery, and then a month before the match went through, they changed and said, I want to do internal medicine. And that's okay. That's totally okay. They switched gears. Their portfolio was geared towards that. They were honest about it in the interview. They got into internal medicine, and they're progressing along their career just fine. So you're allowed to change your mind. Don't put too much pressure on the final subspecialization just yet. But I do hear your point about, and I do encourage you to get exposure within that field. But I would at the same time say, come see a nephrologist, go see a cardiologist, go see a pediatrician. Get a taste, like on your downtime when you're in medical school. There are patches of time that are free. Spend a couple of hours lightly with them. Don't overdo it again, but that's a good idea.
Thank you, Dr. Bagga. So we have another great question here. So this person asked, was there ever an interview that you felt was done unsuccessfully? Why was it unsuccessful to you? And how did you modify your interview strategies since then?
That's a good question. I think so the story I had used of, that I think went badly. So when I sat there and I realized when the interviewer calls a timeout in the interview, right, I thought that was probably not going to go well because of the way it was handled. I think one has to pay attention to what the question that's being asked and answer it honestly and genuinely. So there's an element of having conviction within the answer you have and answering it with the principles within your heart. And then you have to have a little buffer of saying, if I said something wrong, don't worry, to be gently to retract something that you've said. That's totally okay. I mean, in terms of things I've learned in general from doing, I think you do learn a lot from doing interviews, and I'd encourage you to do that. Sometimes people say the line, I'm not applying to so-and-so medical school because I won't go there anyways. You know what? If you don't want to go to a school, but you get an interview, what's the harm in that? You think of it as a practice interview. You go and people go for mock interviews and they get their friends to do interviews and they find people and then they pay people to take courses in these things. I mean, apply a little bit broadly. And if you get some interviews at school, I had a friend who got an interview in Hawaii. There's no way she was going to go there, but got an interview there, did the interview there. Especially with the virtual world, you apply international, you get some interviews. It's great practice for building that experience. And each interview does teach you something about yourself. You find yourself learning about yourself during an interview. Good, bad, and ugly, but I think another thing you learn is you don't want to be too over prepared. These days, I think the risk is people are over prepared. They're overdoing they've scoured every website. They have 100 questions. They've answered them, and it sounds memorized. So there's a danger to being over prepared. I don't find people under prepared at all, and so I think that's how I'd probably relate to that.
Thank you, Dr. Bagga. So we have another question here, somewhat surrounded around mental health. And this person asks, what advice would you give someone who has exam anxiety? So for example, if they're taking the MCAT or any sort of professional exam, how do you overcome this daunting anxiety that is associated with exams such as this?
Yeah, no, that's a tough question. So there's a few pieces to that answer. I think the first question is, the obvious is why is there anxiety? Is the anxiety specific to the exams process itself, or is the anxiety related to life? And what I mean by that is if everything makes you anxious, like I don't love heights. I'm going to get anxious no matter height, but it's specific to that, right? But if I was sort of anxious every time I left my house, then you have to deal with it in that way. If you sort of say, well, the anxiety is limited to just exams, then at least that's a first step. Now the next thing is, well, why exams? And the obvious question and the dangerous elephant in the room question is, are you anxious because you're not ready? And I know that's a bit of a blunt question, but I tend to be pretty honest. So if you're sort of saying, I know I'm not ready and that's why I'm anxious, so then the solution unfortunately relates back to within and saying I need to be more prepared. Now the next layer of questions is, I'm not anxious about other things. I am prepared for the exam. Like before the exam, I am ready, but then the exam process itself makes me anxious and I lose the ability to convey my knowledge appropriately. That's a trickier one. That takes a bit of life experience to get through. So there's a few things, honestly, that gets to the point is that there may be some element of looking at counseling to get through that. There are various techniques of sort of inner reflection or almost, meditation type techniques to bring that sense of calm, because we all have it to a degree. I mean, if I give at the beginning of a speech for the first 2 minutes, I can tell my heart rate's 20 beats higher than it should be, and I have a bead of sweat that comes across. And then once you start, you get into the groove and it moves on. So we all have an element, perhaps, but if you have a heightened anxiety, there may be some professional techniques that mindfulness, reflection, meditation. It does get to the extent of if a counseling is received. I mean, sometimes people do use medications because sometimes it can be that extreme. So if some people use a beta blocker or whatnot to get to that level. So there are layers to this question. It's a complicated and I appreciate the honest question on that. And I think one thing that there's a stigma to it, so people don't ask that question and they don't ask for that help. But that is something that is more common than we realize, and some very talented people don't shine because of that if they don't address it formally and professionally sometimes.
Thank you, Dr. Bagga. That's a very detailed answer. We have a question regarding sort of a balance between the MCAT and academics such as the GPA. So the question is basically, if someone has done really well on the MCAT but has a weak GPA or vice versa, how do you think they can sort of anticipate the application process? Are there alternative avenues? Is there variability between med schools in Canada and elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a good question. Another challenging one. I mean, I think you kind of hint at some of the answers right within the question. There is some spectrum and diversity across the country, and sometimes when you read their websites, you'll sort of see that so and so emphasizes marks over MCAT. Some people don't look at MCAT. Some people will maximize it. So there is a little bit of diversity within Canada. Probably many of you on this thread would know that the American schools put a lot of emphasis on the MCAT. So by chance, if you're sort of on the academically light side, but strong on the MCAT, the American options are a lot more palatable, as well as some other international options. I mean, there's some UK schools, Ireland, Caribbean, etc., Europe, India. There's lots of potential there. And once one has there's a little bit of a sentiment that it may be a little easier to get into those schools, but then there's the challenge comes when getting residency later. It tends to work out for many of the people, but it is a challenge, and it is slightly more challenging than it used to be. So that's that sort of sidebar on that. I think it does. The American schools are really heavy on the MCAT. The Canadian schools, I think you get a sense for they're a little more balanced about it. They really are focusing more on the GPA, and the MCAT is just sort of a necessary evil to kind of meet a sort of a threshold of sorts to confirm that stability. People say, well, why do they need to do these things? The reality is, when you write med school exams, med school is easy. Med school is really, really easy. Each individual line of medicine is very easy. You put them into 10 lines, it's still easy. The trouble with medicine, when everyone says med school is hard or it's challenging, it's just that there's a lot of volume of it. And so what partly this MCAT does is screen is if you're struggling with large volumes of information, it does make it challenging to get through the various texts of medicine that occur. But each individual bite of information in medicine is a joke. There's nothing hard about it. We could do it right now, line by line. This is a bone, this is a muscle, this is a nerve, these are diseases. Line by line, you'll say sure, but the problem is the volume of knowledge out there is significant, and hence the need for, unfortunately, these artificial measurements. I feel bad because I feel so many people are caring and have good hearts and they'd be great doctors, but then there are these artificial, measurements of sorts. And who knows if the MCAT's a good measure or your GPA is a good measure. If you're a caring person, you could be a great physician. You just need a chance. So I would push yourself to kind of get to the point where there is that chance, because I sense a lot of you with the passion that you all have would be great physicians.
Thank you, Dr. Bagga, for those amazing answers. So it looks like we ran out of questions. So unless anyone else has any questions, unfortunately, we are at the end of our session with Dr. Bagga. However, the Elevate Careers Conference team would like to thank you for conducting such an informative and interactive session. The session brought forth such valuable information that I'm sure was useful to everyone present here today. And hopefully in the future, we can have you conduct a session again, because personally, I feel like one session definitely was not enough. Like, I could honestly, continue on for very long, but I know everyone has tight schedules and whatnot. So just like to say thank you.
My pleasure to everyone. Thanks for joining. And I will leave it with Vijay and Sayamrit. If anyone did have a follow-up question, whether it's through email, whether it's if you wanted me to call you later on or something, we can definitely do that if anyone has some specifics that we didn't attend to.
Yes.
Just to reiterate, I think everyone here is very grateful for the opportunity. Dr. Bagga is obviously very well spoken, and he explained things very well. For those of you who are interested, our next session will be next week, Saturday, on November 28th at 1:30 p.m. We are having a guest speaker. He is a practicing radiologist, and he can provide a lot of insight to aspiring doctors. So stay tuned for further details on our website and social media accounts. And we've put a link in the chat, and you can use that link to register for the next session. So thank you, everyone, once again.